proud of this and very pleased, and this is what we need to do. Because if you worship the gods of your enemy, then you've become your enemy. And so, anytime you engage in worship, you engage in carrying forward the aspirations of your enemy's ancestors or your ancestors. So depending on who you worship, that's whose ancestors' aspirations you carry forward. And we know what our enemy's ancestors' aspirations were for us. So we have to be very clear. We're in big trouble, yet we're in relatively good time. But we're not up against an enemy that's standing still and you just chip away and eventually he'll disappear. You're up against an enemy that's very aggressively trying to destroy you. And if you have been studying and staying focused, you will know that the European community is at zero birth rate worldwide. Russia expects in the next 20 years to lose 33 million people. Germany has already calculated that in the last 20, they've lost 5 million people. What zero birth rate means is that we've got more people dying from natural causes than we having birth of natural causes. You understand? Sure. And so they've created all these artificial ways of trying to give birth, but it's not keeping up. But what has resulted, not wanting to succumb to what Dr. Welsing spoke about, genetic annihilation, they're about the job of genociding us. At least keeping us at a management level, manageable level. And AIDS has been the primary and the most effective tools they've found. In North America, it is drugs and the penal system that is the most effective tool for managing our population growth. So you have to be conscious of who you are and where you are, and no matter how much illusion you can get involved in about, yes, black folks say, you're an African American. Oh, I'm not, I'm mixed. But nobody ever celebrates the mixed days. They only celebrate the African stuff. So Africa is the only race on earth. There's only one race on this planet. It's the African race. What has occurred in time and space is those who have deviated through natural mutilation away from the primary biological stock have been socialized to oppose nature, thus opposing God. So you have a culture of people who's in opposition to nature. If you're in opposition to nature, you're in opposition to life. And if you're in opposition to nature and life, you're in opposition to God. Well, those parts of the human family that had to succumb to the two major ice ages, and we reference them now as Europeans or Asiatics for the most part, have built a culture that is in opposition to life itself, and certainly see themselves as competitors with the God itself, and they really think they have become God. And so the very things that have made them powerful now kill them, from cancer and all kinds of incurable diseases that has resulted from the synthetics that they've created from the natural products in nature. And we too live in that ecology, the artificial ecology, so we are suffering from the same things. And because they've already also created an artificial spirituality, a spirituality that makes us think, because we add African essence to the artificial spirituality, we confuse ourselves into thinking that we got something spiritual going on. So you go to a church and be throwing down, even I got a shout.
Hello brothers and sisters, welcome back to the channel. I'm hoping that you're doing great from wherever you're watching me from. Now, Dr. James Small is a black American professor, and he gives a critique of religion, which he presents to black people. Majorly the audience in this context is black people, and it tries to share some important thing with black people, and it critically calls out black people for us to be expecting growth, for us to be expecting development and in everything that we're doing, but we are bowing down to something or to an idea that the person or the people who oppressed us came with. And that's a really, really important topic to discuss about, right? Because he gives this critically. And also, we understand that all these things that were happening to Black Americans all are grounded in sociology. They are grounded in historical analysis that it tries to give. Now, what he does is that he tries to explain that Black Americans are grounded in a historical and sociological analysis of power, domination, and cultural control rather than rejection of spirituality itself. Now, Dr. James Moll consistently distinguishes between spiritual consciousness, which he sees as organic, ancestral, and life-affirming, and institutional religion, which he argues was deliberately weaponized during slavery and colonialism. Now, from Dr. James Moll's perspective, we learn that religion was not merely introduced to enslaved Africans as a belief system, but imposed as an ideological tool designed to reshape identity, obedience, and self-understanding. His warnings is therefore not aimed at faith in the abstract, but uncritical acceptance of religion, of religious frameworks that were constructed and enforced by oppressors to maintain control, right? So I want us to watch this video. I'll be back and then I'll be sharing my thoughts. For those who are always watching it for the first time, I'm asking you to please subscribe to the channel, join the membership, and really get to see what I can offer you. But until then, let's watch the video. I'll be back.
Because that choir sounds so good. That's that African essence loaned to someone else's misconception of spirituality, and that convinced our lowly educated consciousness that we are projecting something spiritual. No, what we're doing is projecting African essence around something that's really diabolical and not spiritual. And so I'm going to do a lot of reading today. And Baba told me I could take as much time as I need, but I'm not going to bury y'all too much, but it's going to be a few hours. But the information is going to be at least 2 hours, maybe 3. But there's a lot of information because we are in big trouble and we don't know why. Because if you challenge even persons in the struggle around the question of God and religion, they will still defend the integrity of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. If you challenge them on the essence of any of those 3 things, they don't know a damn thing about it. They know some basic scripture, they know some basic tenets, they know some basic prayers, and they know the protocol of the temple, which is shing, shout, where you sit, and what kind of clothes you wear. They have no real ideas. Like some people tell you, oh, well, Christianity started in Africa. That's not true. They say, well, the Ethiopians have the oldest church. That's not true. So we need to really not, we don't need to lie to ourselves about our history to have history. And the diabolical Jew will never embrace Nazis to try to proclaim some relationship to their technical achievement. So why do we embrace our Nazis? And we only do it out of fear and ignorance. And so I'm going to try to address some of that fear and some of that ignorance. Because it's important to understand, as my definition of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and I like to really open up with that, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are fragments from the periphery of the African spiritual and cultural system. Fragments from the periphery. They're not even a part of our core. Okay? Fragments from the periphery. And so as I go through tonight, even though it may get a little, it won't be my usual spontaneous kind of thing, because I'm going to be reading a lot of stuff, but I want to give you some information so that when you buy this tape, you could really try to look at some base stuff and then add your own research to it. And challenge anything I say. Don't believe nothing I've got to say. One of the worst things about us is that we've become believers instead of knowers. Okay? Take information from any source that appears to be informative and good, but then check that information out for its validity. me or anybody else. Otherwise, you're doing a disservice to your own consciousness, and you're not going to grow. My attempt is to give you information. I will make mistakes. As you move on with the information, you will get rid of mistakes and add new things to it. So we're going to move on in the evening. I'm waiting for Reverend Brown to really get himself set up like he wants to. But this becomes important because the true war that we have with our enemies is the war for spiritual consciousness. Okay? Everybody in this room will go through the process we call death. I don't care how pretty you are. I don't care how handsome you are. I don't care how intellectually educated you are. I don't care how technically trained you are. I don't care how much wisdom you have acquired. We are all going to die. So it's important then to know what is death. And if your only reference to the knowledge of death comes from your enemy, and he uses the fear of death to keep you in check, then you better question what his definition of death is. Because before we were here in this consciousness, before we were here in this manifestation, we existed according to our culture. That means we've been in existence longer than we've been in this expression. Matter of fact, no matter whose tradition you deal with theocratically or theologically, you cannot have a God and then have anything else. If you have a supreme being, it is the only thing that can exist. Nothing else can exist. If anything else exists, then you have more than one supreme being. So then, if you understand that, and that's right out of African tradition across the continent, that the only thing that exists is the Creator, then what the heck are you? You are but an aspect of its expression in time and space. Some of us like to say we are beings having a human experience. But if you were anything other than an aspect of the being, then you yourself would be a being equal to that being. So the only thing that exists in the African notion of spirituality is God. And there is no notion in any African cultural center of a devil. There actually is no notion of right and wrong. There's just the notion of either being ignorant to what is appropriate or being enlightened to what is appropriate. And if you're ignorant to what is appropriate, you will suffer a consequence because of that ignorance. So it's important to become enlightened, and that's what culture was about. Culture was not about entertainment. Culture was about education, about bringing outside of you what was appropriate for you to be in harmony with the rest of the nature that you were a part of. And that's what music was used for, and that's what dance was used for, and that's what drama was used for. Now it's used to artificially entertain and stimulate you so that you will not reflect on reality. If you turn it down just a little bit. So we probably won't even need it if you can hear me in the back. And as I go along, I usually go up. I start off with a soft bass, but it gets up there. So you understand where I'm going. Because either we are Africans or we're not. See, many of us, myself included, for a long period of time, and probably because of ignorance to a great degree, are playing African. We put on the symbols of Africa, but we don't want to take on the essence of Africa. To take on the essence of Africa, then you have to see yourself as God expressing itself in this time and space, and that means your responsibility is for the world. That means you have authority over the world. If you're not ready to take responsibility for the world, you can't have authority over the world. And if you don't take authority over the world, somebody in the world will have authority over you. And that's what our situation is. Somebody has decided to take authority over you. Tells you when they want you to die, tells you when they want you to live. Tell you what degree you can express your living and what degree you can't. It tells you whether you can love your mate, or tells you when you can't. It tells you how to handle your children and tells you how you shouldn't. And we try to comply because we want to hang on to what is called life, yet none of us can determine when we're going to die, and none can determine how much time we've got. Some people will live to be 100 plus. Some won't make it to 2. And you really don't know when that number is. I've had 3 clinical deaths, and I'm still kicking. I often wonder, who is this after all? You know? But nature wasn't ready for my recycling, and so it regurgitated me back up. For whatever process and use I have in nature and time. So I'm going to start with just some little things that I wrote down. Now, Dr. John Henry Clark said, history sometimes tells you where you have been in order to tell you where you are. So you can estimate where you still have to go. Dr. Clark said, in Who Betrayed the African World Revolution, remember, slavery is never abolished. Slavery is transformed. Now it's computerized. Only the slave can destroy slavery. You cannot destroy slavery by becoming part of your slave master's cultural incubator. Return to an African methodology of human and societal development. That was the message that ancestors left for us, and we need to really study that seriously. I wrote this, and I call it testifying. It's just a couple of words. You are but cells in the body of God. Nothing in nature is your enemy. Only ignorance of your relationship, lacking knowledge today to build institutions. For example, we eat collard greens, right? And we said we eat collard greens because it gives us iron, it gives us this, and it gives us that, right? If you have to eat collard greens to replenish yourself, then you and collard greens are the same thing, aren't you? You eat other food to get protein, whatever, and if you can be replenished and reconstructed because your body is dying millions of cells every day and recreating new cells every day from what you ingested from the rest of the ecology, doesn't that tell you right there you are one with all that exists? And if you are one with all that exists, then the struggle should be for ma'at, harmony, balance in the universe. Every system in nature and the solar system is in your mind. Your role, your family, extended family, race or nation. Sparrows must follow the instructions of their ancestors. Instruct and inform by your ancestors. If you do not get instructed and informed by your ancestors, and you take instructions and information from somebody else's ancestors, you're going to be a mutant, like we are. We are psycho-spiritual mutants of white diabolicalism. Because a sparrow, if it took instruction from a robin's ancestor, that sparrow would be a mutant. It would be a cripple, wouldn't it? Even though they're both birds, aren't they? So in order for the sparrow to be the sparrow, it must take its primary instruction from the ancestors and the gene pool and the DNA and the RNA of sparrows. Not robins, even though they're both birds. We Africans must ask ourselves who instructs and informs our consciousness on how to be a being in this world. And I know some of you said, well, Jesus, my Jesus, sweet fantasy of white imagery in my consciousness saved my soul. The only reason we called on Jesus because it was death to call on anything else. Jesus didn't transform the Africans during slavery who heard about it. The Africans transformed Jesus. The degree to which Christianity in America have any credibility is the degree to which the Africans took that sick view of reality and gave it spiritual credibility. But if you don't study and see what we did with it, you will think the white man gave you something credible. And you won't see that you took something that was incredible and made it credible.
That's right.
You understand what I'm saying? Because this is important to understand. Because our children, even the best of us, in struggle, our children that we give birth to are being influenced, impacted, and directed by the socialization process of the rest of society, and we have to struggle just to keep our offspring focused on just basic survival, let alone really seeing what we've been trying to tell them. Because everything in the culture is designed to murder things African. So if you struggle to bring African into being in your consciousness, and you give birth to a child in this society, it doesn't possess what you possess, because all of the machinery from the time you went to a hospital and had them put you through the process to give birth in the wrong, unhealthy manner to start with, they went at war against your offspring. And when we send them to the school, thinking we sending them to the best schools, so we're going to send them someplace where that's not in the ghetto, and realizing that we are defaming ourselves by calling our community a ghetto to start with. We live in communities. It may be under attack by our enemies, but we don't live in ghettos. Our enemies want us in ghettos, but what are we choosing for ourselves? How are we defining where we are for ourselves? And because he can convince us that we live in ghettos and our schools can't work, we don't even go to the schools to make them work. We send our children to our enemy, who we haven't even transformed, and say, now mold this for me, and he murders it and sends it back, and you go into crisis trying to figure out what happened. Y'all understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with psycho-spiritual terrorism. And you got to understand that. It's very important that we understand psycho-spiritual terrorism, so that when we begin to look at economic terrorism, we can see why economic terrorism is so effective against us, because the psycho-spiritual terrorism have been so successful. We'll be talking, of course, about principles. And principles is a law of nature as formulated and accepted by the mind, an essential truth upon which other truth is based. The acceptance of moral law as a guide to behavior, a rule by which a person chooses to govern his or her conduct, often forming part of a code, the elements or rudiments of any art, science, or discipline. So we must think in terms of principles, concepts, and ideas. Principle, concepts, and ideas. Those are the three areas, categories that we're going to use in terms of engines to construct our personality and our character. I've written a definition for spirituality too that I like to use. But first, I want to reiterate, we must return to ancestral consciousness as a way of transforming consciousness. Only by advancing African consciousness will we achieve African liberation. Restore African and our ancestral cultural integrity. This will allow us to resist European ideas, socialization, and begin to reestablish our ways of balance, harmony, and justice, or ma'at. Let me try and explain so you really get it. We know past, present, and future as the three spheres of time. Africa know only one sphere. Okay? The future doesn't exist. It never exists. It is aspiration. It is dreams. It is hope. It inspires and it motivates you to be. But it doesn't really exist. And you can't go to it and borrow anything to build anything with. That's tangible. You can be stimulated and motivated by the aspirations for what is possible. The present is incomplete because it's coming into being. Doesn't exist yet. You're creating in the present. You're bringing into being. There's nothing there completed for you to use to build anything with. Only in the past only in the past can you find completed models, blueprints of concepts, ideas, and principles with which to construct your aspirations you call future in your present. And the very instant that you've completed a construction in the present and realize a future, it becomes the past again, to instruct and to inform. And that's why ancestors, which is the past, is essential to be your instructors and your informers. Whether they were enslaved, whether they were a prostitute on the corner, whether they were a junkie standing in a doorway, because that junkie and that prostitute was you that simply got damaged more than the you that's looking at them by the enemy's blows. But within the context of having to struggle against those blows, even they have wisdom that can keep you and your children from ending up in that doorway or on that street corner. So you've got to listen to your ancestors and be instructed and informed by their experiences. Spirituality, in the final analysis, is the resulting condition, habits, principles, concepts, ideas, rituals, practice from being instructed and informed by your ancestors. It is, of course, God the Creator, our creation itself, that are and is our primary ancestor. That our obligation on this experience is to be exactly like what we call God. That is the primary role model for how you want to behave. We know that culture, the training and development of the mind, the refinement of tastes and manners acquired by such training, and again spirituality is systemic understanding of your relationship to the rest of nature and the universe, and process and methods used to stay in harmony with all that exists. Culture, again, the social and religious structures and intellectual and artistic manifestation, etc., that characterizes society, the rearing, the cultivating in a preparated way to prepare at least the minimum the next generation. To cultivate, to prepare, to raise, to improve, to refine, to cause to develop. And what do you want to cause to develop? The psychological being, the physiological being, the sociological being, and the spiritual being. And so we need to make sure that in doing this, we don't get carried away like some of us get out there on the spiritual skids and we out in outer space someplace and we have no connection to reality. You must stay focused on food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security. That the energy you're expanding because in order to breathe and live for the next few days or weeks, you must have food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security. Don't just get out and say, I'm on a spiritual trip, and we out there not being responsible to the most fundamental reality. In order to provide food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security, you must then be clear that you must control land, you must control political institutions, you must control educational institutions, you must control health care services in your community, you must control police and security in your community. You can't do any of this unless you clear on three areas: economic, politics, and culture. You cannot separate them from spirituality. You cannot separate them from nation building. Economic, politics, and culture. Economic is control of your ecology and what it produces and what you can extract from it. In the continent of Africa, we have diamond, gold, oil, cobalt, tungsten, you name it. But in Philadelphia, what you have primarily in your ecology is your tax revenue and your youth. And if you have not developed the wisdom to have your tax revenue that has been extracted from you in the course of 12 months, and it comes back to your state and your city in terms of earmarked money, and if you do not have the wisdom and the knowledge and understanding how to get access to that capital so it serves you for your needs, then you don't know anything about economics. I don't care what you know about bookkeeping, accounting, or banking. Because those are just tools of economics. They are not economics.
Hello brothers and sisters, welcome back to the channel. I hope you've watched the video. I hope you've learned and saw it for yourself, heard the historical context that he's trying to share. Now, historically, Dr. Small situates Christianity in the Americas within context of chattel slavery and European imperial expansion. Remember that enslaved Africans did not encounter Christianity as a neutral expansion. Enslaved Africans did not encounter Christianity as a neutral moral philosophy. Rather, they countered it alongside chains, whips, and laws that defined them as property. Biblical narratives were selectively taught to emphasize obedience, patience in suffering, and reward in the afterlife, while passages about liberation, about justice, and resistance were suppressed or reinterpreted. Dr. Small argues that this selective transmission was intentional, serving to pacify enslaved populations by encouraging them to internalize suffering as divinely ordained rather than socially imposed. And in this sense, religion functioned as a psychological extension of physical domination. Also, a central theme in Dr. Small's work is the concept of epistemic control, that is, the power to define what is true, sacred, and authoritative. He contends that when Black Americans adopt religious narratives without interrogating their historical origins, they risk inheriting the worldview of those who once enslaved and humanized them. This includes theological assumptions about God's nature, morality, hierarchy, and even imagery. Small is particularly critical of depictions of divinity that mirror European racial and political dominance, arguing that such representations subtly reinforce white supremacy by positioning whiteness as closer to the divine and blackness as subordinate or sinful. Also in the same line, we understand that Dr. James Small is trying to challenge the moral contradiction which is embedded in institutional religion as practiced in slaveholding societies. He highlights the fact that many of the most devout Christian nations and individuals were simultaneously architects of slavery, colonial genocide, and racial exploitation. For Small, this contradiction exposes a fundamental problem. Religion was not preventing moral atrocity, but was instead being used to justify it. Biblical passages were invoked to defend slavery, segregation, and racial hierarchy, revealing that religious interpretation often follows power rather than conscience. This, he argues that it should raise a serious question about moral authority of institutions that claim divine legitimacy while perpetuating injustice. Another key aspect of Small's critique concerns identity erasure, and he argues that enslaved Africans were stripped not only of their names, not only of their languages, not only of their homes, histories, but also their spiritual systems, cosmologies, and ancestral philosophies. In their place, they were given a religious identity that disconnected them from Africa and reoriented their sense of self toward Europe and Middle East. Dr. Small suggests that this spiritual displacement has long-term psychological consequences, including confusion about origins, diminished cultural self-esteem, and dependency on external validation for meaning and morality. What's so much important that Dr. Smalls talks about is Dr. Small does not frame Black Americans as passive victims in the process, but rather, he emphasizes that complexity of adaptation and resistance. Enslaved Africans reinterpret Christianity in ways that preserve communal solidarity, hope, and coded resistance, giving rise to the Black Church as both a spiritual and political institution. However, Small warns that what began as survival strategy can become a limitation if it prevents critical examination when uh, when religion discourages questioning political engagement or structural analysis. It risks reinforcing the very systems that continue to marginalize Black communities. Dr. Small warning also extends to contemporary social contradictions. He argues that resilience on religion consolations can sometimes substitute for material struggle, collective organizing, and political consciousness. When faith can provide emotional resilience, Small cautions against narratives that frame poverty, inequality, and violence as purely moral or spiritual problems rather than outcomes of historical and structural forces. And in this way, religion may unintentionally shift responsibility away from institutions and onto individuals, discouraging systemic change while promoting personal salvation. So, brothers and sisters, I really want to know what you are saying about this video, right? I couldn't say much, but I just wanted to share my 2 cents in regards to this and what I've learned and what I've summarized while watching the video, right? So please, let me know what you've learned. Let me know what you think about this video. I'm your host and presenter Ejitech Stories. But until then, let me see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.